The first thing I do as a clinician, if someone comes to me and says they're depressed, is ask myself a question. Well, what does this person mean by that? So I have to find out, because maybe they're not depressed, maybe they're hyper anxious, or maybe they're obsessional. There's various forms of powerful negative emotion, so they need to be differentiated. But then the next question you have to ask is, well, are you depressed, or do you have a terrible life?
Well, stress is the disease of the century. It is a multi-billion-dollar business. The management of stress, the cure for stress, whether it comes through paying a counselor or different medicines or books or stress management classes or seminars or whatever. I mean, well, you saw the way you reacted. And when I told the worship team what I was going to teach them, they were all like, oh, we are really going to listen this weekend. And so, I mean, I think surely we all understand that it's not God's will for us to live under pressure and stress all the time. How many of us understand that that is not God's will, okay? And so, it is a disease of our culture, but just because we live in a culture, that doesn't mean that we have to adopt that culture.
So, is there anyone in this room who would like to have a better memory? Better being able to remember things? Okay, that's nearly half of you. And are there maybe people in this room who would like to have better concentration, better being able to focus on your job and not get distracted all the time? It's even more people. Well, I can tell you, if these things don't work the way you want them to, it may have to do with stress, and luckily there are things you can do to improve it. I'm trained as a neurobiologist and I work as a science journalist, so you can say I know a thing or two about this precious organ. But there can be quite a gap between knowing a lot about the brain and actually being good to it, I learned. When I started off as a science journalist 20 years ago, I was so eager to show the world that I could do it. I took on every assignment I could have. I interviewed every hotshot around. I worked till way past midnight, and I had to get up early because I had 2 little kids and a hardworking husband and all sorts of challenges and no time to think. Now, we all know where that leads to, right? I couldn't believe it, but I had a burnout. And it felt my brain had just given up on me. I wasn't able to plan anymore. I couldn't decide from a large to-do list what to do first, what to do next. I couldn't concentrate on my work. I couldn't remember anything, and my emotions were all over the place, mainly low. And as a science journalist and as a brain scientist, I knew that chronic stress is devastating for your brain. It gets marinated in a toxic cocktail of stress hormones, and it affects 2 areas in particular.
I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote when I wasn't very happy. I actually wrote this a year ago, but again, as if you know depression, it comes back. It's a reoccurring thing that you can't really swat away. Anyway. Who am I? Who am I trying to be? Not myself, anyone but myself. Living in a fantasy to bury the reality, making myself the mystery, a strong facade disguising the misery. Empty but beyond the point of emptiness, full to the brim of fake confidence, a guard that will never be broken because I broke a long time ago. I'm hurting, but don't tell anyone. No one needs to know. Don't show all you've failed. Always okay, always fine, always on show. The show must go on, it will never stop. The show must not go on, but I know it will. I give up giving up. I am lost. I don't need to be saved, I need to be found. Basically, it's kind of just the same reoccurring thing of, not knowing who you are and feeling. This started when I was about 15 years old. I was at school. I really wanted to do well at school to please my parents, to please my family. I didn't really care that much about school because I knew I was never going to be very good at it. I think I pushed myself so far, got to the point where I had a bit of a mental breakdown. I was one of those people that just did enough work. But again, I have very bad learning disabilities though. If you look at my writing, it's not good at all. It's probably like a 9-year-old boy, if you know what that looks like. But I was, just pushing past. So I got to the point where I went a bit mad. I was completely suicidal, didn't want to live anymore. I thought that I was completely alone. I also realized how lucky I was and what a wonderful family, wonderful friends I had, but that didn't matter. I wanted the world to swallow me up, and nothing seemed better to me than death, which is completely insane. So I got taken out of school, went to therapy, got put on antidepressants, kind of clawed my way back to some sort of rational thought, which took a while. But basically I stayed in school until I was 17, where I still was kind of plagued with this depression, and I was like, I'm done, I need to leave, which to the rather large disagreement from my parents, I left, and I knew I had to do something, because otherwise I would just go crazy. So a
form of, at least in part, involuntary suffering is depression. Do you have advice for people on how to find a way out? You're a man who has suffered in this way, perhaps continue to suffer in this way. How do you find a way out?
The first thing I do when someone comes to me and says they're depressed is ask myself a question. Well, what does this person mean by that? So I have to find out, because maybe they're not depressed, maybe they're hyper anxious, or maybe they're obsessional. There's various forms of powerful negative emotion, so they need to be differentiated. But then the next question you have to ask is, well, are you depressed, or do you have a terrible life? Or is it some combination of the two? So if you're depressed, as far as I can tell, you don't have a terrible life. You have friends, you have family, you have an intimate relationship, you have a job or a career, you're about as educated as you should be given your intelligence. Use your time outside of work wisely. You're not beholden to alcohol or other temptations. You're engaged in the community in some fundamental sense, and all that's working. Now, if you have all that and you're feeling really awful, you're either ill or you're depressed. And so then sometimes there's a biochemical route to that, treatment of that. My experience has been as a clinician is if you're depressed, but you have a life and you take an antidepressant, it will probably help you a lot. Now, maybe you're not depressed. Exactly. You just have a terrible life. What does that look like? You have no relationship. Your family's a mess. You've got no friends. You've got no plan. You've got no job. You use your time outside of work not only badly, but destructively. You have a drug or alcohol habit or some other vice, pornography addiction. You are completely unengaged in the surrounding community. You have no scaffolding whatsoever to support you in your current mode of being or your move forward. And then, as a therapist, well, you do two things. Well, if it's depression per se, well, like I said, there's sometimes a biochemical route, a nutritional route. There's ways that can be addressed. It's probably physiological if you're, at least in part, if you're depressed but you have an okay life. Sometimes it's conceptual. You can turn to dreams sometimes to help people because dreams contain the seeds of the potential future. And if your person is a real good dreamer and you can analyze dreams, that can be really helpful. But that seems to be only true for more creative people. And for the people who just have a terrible life, it's like, okay, you have a terrible life. Well, let's pick a front.
I'm just going to tell you that I don't have any magic trick to just wave a wand over you this weekend and make all your stress go away. And neither does anybody else who want to know the truth. I honestly think sometimes when people go to stress management classes or counseling or whatever, I don't think a lot of times they go with this mindset, I'm ready to make a change. I think it's just, well, I want somebody to solve my problem. And we have to camp here for a minute or this whole thing is going to be useless. I cannot solve your problem, and neither can God, if you won't do what God shows you to do or not do what God shows you not to do. I want you to get this, because this has just been coming to me really strong, that prayer is not just, now God's going to fix all this. I mean, obviously, there are many times when that is what happens, because maybe you're already doing what God's asking you to do, and now God needs to do his part. Prayer is not